No, I think it's a philosophical difference because the definitions of objective and subjective kind of conflict with each other depending on what definition you're using. So we can, if if somebody says to you after you've explained why you think something is bad, that's just your opinion, it's a dismissal. So when somebody says that's subjective, when you say this is bad or this is good based on my criteria or my standard set, then the point of the conversation is that we've already reached the end of it. There's nothing more further to discuss. But it's also from the people that are saying the subjective side that we're using subjective and objective wrong. So I can understand how there's like a complete difference on how the philosophies work. The issue that I have is that people are using these words and terms to dismiss people's good takes by saying, oh, that's just subjective. This is why I think this is bad. It's pretty bad. And then they go, no, that's just subjective. That's your opinion.
It's just a social construct, okay? Okay, I mean, it's meaningless.
The problem that people have is combining subjectivity and objectivity to come up with a well-founded statement. You don't have to even mention subjectivity and objectivity. You can just make your argument. That's the thing. So, like, there is an episode of Star Trek where they talk about, there's multiple times where there's one episode where Data has a poetry reading and he's reciting his poetry and it's like, that was in pentamic tetrameter or whatever. And the criticism is that he is so technically brilliant, like when he plays instruments and stuff or when he makes music, but there's nothing different about it. It's all based on other people's work and quantifying complexity and trying to see how there's like patterns that would make one better than the other. But the real problem with all of this is that what we're looking for when we go to a video or when we have the conversation about it is to understand why something worked the way that it did, regardless of if it was for you or for the entire population or for a portion of the population. Trying to understand the mechanics of something, regardless of if it's subjective or objective or whatever philosophically. The point is that we're talking about a specific thing. We're not talking about the philosophy behind it. So if we want to talk about how something works, we can talk about how that pertains to the facts. Then we can add our opinion about where it's appropriate to use it or not and have debates about why we think something is more effective than the other. But there are multiple roads to Rome. Take it one at a time. The problem is that this is philosophically foundationalism versus constructivism. If you think that everything that human beings come up with, or like in a tabula rasa situation, that all of our perceptions and all those things, they're all just constructs, then of course it's all subjective. But if you're arguing with somebody who doesn't view the world that way, who ontologically and epistemologically looks at the world as if there is meaning inherently to things, that the universe does work in a way that has inherent meaning, you're at complete odds with somebody that thinks that none of it does and it's all made up on your perceptions and your interpretations by your brain. I think that they both have good statements to make, but you can't conclusively say that, because if we are going by the standard of this philosophy, to be objective, to have all the information about reality and to be able to process it and know it all at the same time is probably impossible. So what we have here is a philosophical difference about how intention is created and inspiration. If we believe that everything is just us coming up with things and it's subjective to our perceptions and our perceptions are our own and our will and that kind of thing, then yeah, I can understand how everything is just symbolic interpretation and that you're making up meaning to it. However, I think that there are elements of natural selection and of evolution and of how certain things develop over time, molecules, the way that atoms, the decay of radioactive isotopes, for example, these things I think follow patterns. So I don't have a definitive explanation for saying, oh, the entire universe is objective and da-da-da. And I also don't think that you have an argument to say that the entire universe, the way that we perceive it, is entirely subjective because it's our subjective perceptions. Because on top of that, you get into the fucking quantum entanglement and observer effect and all these different questions about reality. Ultimately, you can't definitively say if this is going to be a foundationalist or a constructivist reality that we exist in. It's probably a combination. It's probably both at the same time as a contradiction. The universe is
Glib,
full of
that
contradictions.
doesn't have anything to do with stories, not a car.
Yes,
And I
it
kinda wanna
does.
get-
Well, this
Is
the
there-
problem is
the
that
art-
it could be, and maybe it can, maybe it isn't. Maybe there's a pattern that you could objectively, you could find the objectivity in all of human nature and all of human patterns. If you had some sort of quantum computer that could just understand what all of the genetic dispositions of the people on the planet and all of the potential thought processes that they could have to all of the potential stimuli, you could potentially figure that out, but you're never going to. So I think that whenever this dichotomy comes up, it's complete dismissal of someone's expertise or understanding of something and their opinion to say, oh, it's all subjective. It's so dismissive because, yeah, we know let's say we agree and we know it's all subjective. You're talking to a bunch of people that value something similar then, and then you're the outlier saying that what they value is not valuable. That's the problem.
So back to Uncompetitive's comment very quickly, and they're saying that art does not have a function. And I would say that art very often has the function of creating enjoyment, and there are objective
he's going to
ways
say
you
that's
can-
subjective.
But
He's
there
going
are
to say it's
objective ways that
subjective.
you can make an art more enjoyable, because there are things which people subjectively enjoy within art. A lot of people really like good writing because it very much helps them immerse them in the world, and it actually gives them something to eat. You can
That's subjective.
Going to Smud's food analogy, you can eat paste. It's going to technically fulfill a function of eating you.
But that's
of eating.
subjective. Your
But
enjoyment is subjective.
There are things that you can put within the food which are going to make you enjoy it a lot more, and these are objective. Smud would make a better analogy with food if he was here, but it's very much the same idea of, there are elements in food, even though your enjoyment of the food is subjective, there are objective things in that food that make it taste better. Just like in stories, there are objective things which make you enjoy your stories a lot more. And bad writing is something which is definitely objective, and you often need very good writing to tell a story.
I don't think that you can objectively ascertain what good or bad writing is. I think the problem is using the words objective and good together, or subjective and good to try and sum something up. There's a state that needs to be there.
It can even be something as simple as not having constant continuity mistakes, not having contradictory this, that, or the other. There are lots of elements in writing that are very objective, even if it's down to
that's subjective. Your perception of if it's good or not is subjective. Okay, but the facts of how it happened is objective. Now, my point of being on the internet and talking about films is to try and be factual as much as possible about how something is done, so that people can then do it themselves or ascertain why they like something. I'm into that scientific exploration or that just philosophical exploration. What bothers me is people shutting down an argument because we get stuck on objective versus subjective. When we talk about facts in a film or a story, we're talking about facts that exist within the fiction and the narrative of that story with the given rule set, whether it's an ad hoc rule set or it's explicitly explained. You cannot dismiss the facts of a story when we are talking about a story by saying facts in a story are subjective. That's an issue there. Then the other issue is people conflating objectivity with data or facts. Like you have information that can lead you to the conclusion, but there are people that are out there that are going to say, oh, it's all subjective because art is intended to do this. It's intended to evoke an emotion, and you can't guarantee that. Then the only argument against that is to say, potentially we could measure and figure out and do it, but we don't have that information. So it all comes down to this really annoying philosophical argument, which is not about what we're talking about. What we are talking about is how we think this art worked and why we think something worked and what didn't work. It's all of our opinion. We're trying to use facts to inform our opinion. That's the simplest thing. Then the value of your opinion, I think, in my mind, which is subjective, is that you have those things to back up your statement. You either have history that you've researched, you either have your own intuitive information that you can use to use inductive logic, or you can deduce information based on the information that's presented in front of you. That is fine. The problem is when your argument is dismissed because someone says, that's subjective. That's subjective. It's really annoying.
But Competitive also says a movie doesn't need to have a story that is a subjective assumption that is based against non-narrative cinema.
Right, but here's the thing is
talk
that
about the Last
when
Jedi
you
and stuff. I mean,
when you say
talk about the Star Wars movies. These are they're trying to tell a story.
A film doesn't need to have a story. That's quite a weird.
It doesn't. It doesn't. But what you say is that okay, here are the likely outcomes of these choices, and then they don't have an argument. They can say, "Oh no, that's not likely." What do you mean the storyless movie's not going to do well in theaters? Why are you saying that? That's subjective. I'm like, no, that's based on the patterns that I've seen. This is what I believe. The problem is when we bring in objectivity versus subjectivity, because people are trying to dismiss facts on the by using subjectivity wrong.